Welcome, everybody, to another edition of EverEdge's podcast on intangible assets. Today, I have the great pleasure in speaking to Anil Mehta. Anil is the General Counsel of Pure Harvest, a great EverEdge client we've been working with for some years now. Now, Mr. Mehta is a UK qualified attorney with over 20 years' experience in the MENA, Europe, and Asia, including over 10 years with Allen & Overy in London and in the UAE. Anil is an experienced investor and advisor who served as a board advisor to Kareem for over 7 years and is also involved in a wide range of other ventures. Anil has been the General Counsel, as I mentioned, at Pure Harvest since its formation. He attained his first degree in land economy at the University of Aberdeen and later studied law at Nottingham Law School. Anil was awarded a Master's in Law at King's College London. So without any further ado, welcome Anil, and let's jump into it. Thank you very much for getting up early in the morning for us. And let's start with just a really simple question that, Pure Harvest has experienced some phenomenal growth over the past 5 years as you've moved from really what started at obviously a concept through to commercialization. Could you tell us a little bit more about Pure Harvest and how the business has scaled from that idea to becoming what it is now, a highly successful business?
Sure, yes. Thank you very much, Paul. And great to be here with you this morning. To answer your question, yes, Pure Harvest was started around 6 years ago by three founders, Sky Kurtz and Robert Kupstas, both Stanford alums, and Mahmoud Adi, also a Stanford grad and an Emirati, and a very important local partner, therefore, in the kind of founder team. So I joined them around 6 years ago, and it was very much a little more than a PowerPoint deck and some good ideas and some relatively untested technology. In a very hot and humid environment. So the thesis of the business was really to create a technological solution capable of growing fruit and vegetables in arguably the harshest climates in the world. So we have very, very high humidity, we have very, very high temperatures at times of the year, over 50 degrees Celsius in the Middle East. And so the other driver here was around food security and the reliance of the UAE and many of the Gulf countries on imported produce. So around 90% of the produce consumed in the UAE is actually imported, and most of that is in fact flown in from places like the Netherlands, where most of the tomatoes come, and the berries are mainly imported from the US. So a very, very expensive process, very wasteful, and very, very bad for the environment. And our objective was really to turn that on its head, to grow food in a very, very healthy way, effectively organically, in a clean environment, very, very close to market, and to reduce that reliance on air transportation. So that was the basic thesis. What it took to really get that off the ground was harnessing a lot of technology, some of which was in existence already, but was not really suited to the types of conditions that we have in the Middle East. So we've taken some existing proprietary technology and developed that in partnership with some of the technology providers. Principally, I'm talking now about the kind of climate control system. So we have a very high-tech and sealed greenhouse unit, which has an entirely sealed internal climate, where we can control the humidity, the temperature, the concentration of gases such as CO2 in the air and in the atmosphere. And to do that, we rely on a very, very sophisticated software product, which admittedly was basically designed for conditions which are a bit less demanding than ours here in the UAE. And so again, with partnership with that technology provider, we've really kind of built that technology out, developed it, and also, of course, utilized and relied on the growing techniques of the people that work in the business. The growers, our key grower, Jan, is a fourth generation Dutch grower. And he's brought an extraordinary team of people with him to enable us to grow the products that we do. We're now achieving yields that are in many cases more than 10 times the yields of conventional farming. So fairly extraordinary results.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic, and it strikes me that one of the things when we first started working with you is that this was not a simple case of take existing greenhouse technology and and simply upgrading and upscaling it. It seemed to me that there was a real step change involved here, that there were fundamentally new technologies sort of being deployed or things that you had to learn that really nobody else had done before. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the challenges that we have, the very extreme temperatures and the very high humidity, are exceptional. No one else has really grown in these types of conditions, arguably. And I think possibly similar conditions exist in parts of the southern states and also in Southeast Asia. And of course, that's one of our next objectives for expanding the business globally into Southeast Asia. And in fact, today we just incorporated our Singaporean subsidiary. So we're very much looking forward to kind of raising the flag, the Pure Harvest flag in Singapore shortly.
Great.
But yes, you're absolutely right. We have had to develop the software in particular, which controls the hardware, the growing system, in a way which has really never been developed before, and therefore we have, in our view, a very considerable advantage on our competitors. We have several competitors which have effectively failed in the same climate conditions, in the same markets, because they haven't invested the same level of thought and cash, quite frankly, in the technology as we have. So that has really proven, I think, the technological case for the business.
Fantastic. And it's interesting, oftentimes I think, people might look at, a large agricultural business growing, lots of fruit and vegetables, big investment in glass and things, and think that it's really about, essentially fixed assets and capital, whereas it strikes me that actually, and you've mentioned that a couple of times, that Pure Harvest is actually really at its heart a technology business. And as you would expect me to say, right, it's one that's driven by its intangible assets. So, how did you really, obviously those assets are going to be core to your value. How have you gone about making sure that you're protecting those assets? Because those are the ones that are going to be ultimately driving your competitive edge over the long run.
Yeah, really interesting question. So I have to say that EverEdge was a really important piece of the equation here.
Yeah.
Because I think
I didn't set him up for that question, just in case anybody's wondering. Yeah.
I think for some time we were kind of struggling to understand really how we capture the intellectual property or the intangible assets that are clearly so core to the business, but which are not necessarily easy to define. So I think we are not a business where there's a very, very clear-cut case of there being 10 patents that we can register or 15 design rights or something like that. We've explored possibilities with you and your team about whether there are some processes, for example, which could be capable of protection through registration. And we've come to the conclusion that there probably are. But strategically, we have decided, with your support really and advice, to not register those at this stage, and the reason being clearly that we don't want to make public the content of those technological advancements. So the counter to that is what have we done to protect what we have? I think the first part of the answer to that question was fundamentally us understanding what we have, and that was not straightforward. Again, it was not like we were able to say, here's the widget that we've created, we really need to patent it. It was more about understanding the multiple layers of know-how, of thought processes, of knowledge, growing techniques, customer lists, and so on, which really build up this complex matrix, if you like, of different contractual mechanisms and different work products, which together create this very, very substantial body of intangible assets. So having come to that kind of realization and having been made to look at our business differently in terms of assessing the intangible landscape, we then went about trying to figure out what are the building blocks which build up this big intangible value. I guess at one end of the scale, you've got something as basic as our NDAs and the other confidentiality restrictions which exist in people's employment contracts and in the non-disclosure agreements that we agree with external parties, with technology providers, and so on. We've also had to look at the way in which we capture knowledge, and we therefore looked at all of our employment contracts and tried to understand, are these adequate in terms of the way in which we capture the work product of people, which is incredibly important, right? I mean, this really is absolutely fundamental to the value of the business. And then we've looked at the way in which that information is harnessed and utilized in order to ensure that we're not reliant on a sort of key man and susceptible to a key man risk. So we've started to try to codify the type of information that we have by creating, for example, a playbook. How does Pure Harvest enter into a new market? What are the practical steps that we take to do that? And trying to really codify all of that knowledge and distill it down into a very concise but very, very comprehensive methodology, if you like, for doing business. And that really applies across the board in a number of different areas. So it could be, I use the example of entering a new market. It could be growing. How do we grow this new crop? What are the perfect or the optimal climate conditions, the concentration of CO2 gas that we have to expose it to, and so on. So these are fundamental data points, if you like, which are absolutely core to the business. And again, we've had to sort of really think about very, very hard about how we maximize the value in those things. I guess the other aspects that we've spent a lot of time and, quite frankly, money exploring with yourselves and with external counsel has been around the use of data. So we have around 5 or 6 years of growing data in these incredibly harsh conditions. And then that informs so many different aspects of other businesses. So it informs the way in which software and hardware is developed and designed. It affects the way in which seeds are selected, grown, or developed to become more heat resistant, more humidity resistant, or resistant to particular diseases, and so on. And that data is really, really core to our business. I mean, it's an absolute trade secret that we will never allow anyone to own or to take from us. By the same token, for example, software providers, the providers of our climate control system, need to have some access to that data, and we've therefore looked at a range of practical and legal constraints on the way in which the data is used. So I don't want to go into too much detail. It's quite a complicated area, but these are a number of examples of the ways in which we've had to really relook at the business and become a lot more rigorous about the way in which we capture all this knowledge and know-how.
Well, and look, that's one of the things that I thought for me was so interesting working with Pure Harvest is that you've hit upon something that we see with many companies, is that there are so many different kinds of intangible assets at play. This, as you said right at the beginning, this is not just a simple factor. Oh, look, there's some patents and here's some trademarks and maybe some designs. That's the end of it. Like the registered rights, as you mentioned. You have all of these different things that are at work supporting the core, this technology proposition that you've developed, software, the data, the customer supplier relationships, the industrial know-how, the trade secrets that you mentioned, or, the plant variety rights, all of those things come to bear around it. And I think that awareness is central to developing up an incredibly strong proposition in the way that you guys have. Now, obviously, you guys understand it, and it's been great to be part of the journey. One of the questions I wanted to ask you about is that you've recently completed a very successful capital raise. To what extent do you think that investors understood that? Was there a lot of work on your behalf, on your part, having to really educate them about this, or do you think that once you began to explain it to them, the importance of these things, that they kind of got it?
So one has to bring potential investors who inevitably, now that we're dealing with very, very serious institutional investors, writing very significant checks, are inevitably advised by sophisticated, very, very good law firms and other advisors. We have to explain to them that we've made a strategic decision not to register any intellectual property rights. And then we have to describe to them to use this expression again, this complex matrix of contractual mechanisms that exist. And we've done a lot of work in basically preparing a sort of very, very detailed, comprehensive segment of our kind of data room, which kind of explains the whole philosophy and the practical steps that we've done and builds up the whole picture. Which, when you see it together, and there are literally sort of 5 or 6 different layers of the protections as they exist now, it is quite impressive. And we haven't had any serious pushback really on that.
Great. Yeah, it's really intriguing. Having spent quite a bit of time in the Valley, my experience is that VCs and other sort of private equity investors typically would fall into one or two camps, right? They're those that like, what, you don't have a patent? What's wrong with you? And then the others are like, well, why would you bother filing patents? You just run fast and break things, right? And the irony is that neither of those two strategies is particularly correct or particularly nuanced. It really misses the fact that you've got to craft that strategy for the most appropriate situation you find yourselves in. And, in the case of Pure Harvest, for the moment at least, and that isn't even how things might be in 12 months or 18 months time, a more non-registered strategy was the more appropriate path to go down. So there's a big educative component. Um, and sort of keeping with that theme around investors, to what sort of advice do you think you'd give companies that are preparing for a major capital event, raising capital, or maybe even an exit, and articulating the value of the company? Because Pure Harvest being like so many other growth companies, it's financial. The real financial rewards are going to come into the future, and obviously, yes, you can forecast cash flows and all of those other kind of things. But to what extent have you been able to explain the value of both your sort of technology and your intangible assets to potential investors? How have you found that process?
Yeah, I think the first important point is to invest time early in
Yeah,
in really thinking through what intangibles mean in the context of the business. And I don't think that it's as straightforward as simply assuming that everything has to be patented or registered in some other way. That just isn't right for every business. So I think it is important to understand strategically what is right for the business and what fits with the reality of the way in which the business operates, what its work product is, and what it's doing, and how competitive the environment is. So I think that's the first thing. And if it is, I think, as will be the case for most businesses, not as simple as saying, well, we need to patent these 6 things,
mm,
then quite frankly, it's probably a harder task to build up that matrix of protections. But again, I think the earlier that time and money is invested in getting this right, the better, because clearly it's not difficult to get it wrong. If you fail to capture the know-how and IP created by a key person in their employment contract or consultancy agreement or whatever it is, early on, then there is a risk that some of that value is lost, and that could be potentially disastrous. And it's that kind of risk which is very, very obvious to a well-advised institutional investor. So I think I would, and it's no easy thing for any startup or growth business to do, but I think this is one of the things where it really pays off to invest time and money early on, get the strategy right, put in place a practical, doable plan for executing the strategy, and make sure that everybody in the business understands it in terms of what do the provisions of their employment contract really mean. What are they actually allowed to say to people? What are they really not allowed to say to people? What are they allowed to speak to about colleagues? Who's allowed to access this area of a database, who's not, and the reasons why. Again, building up this understanding within the workforce is really, really important, and then being able to articulate that externally, incredibly important.
yeah. Look, absolutely. I mean, if one of the things that we find consistently clients say to us when we do work with them is that we wish we'd done this earlier. And I think you're absolutely right. I think if you can get to this stuff early, it's one of those classic situations in business where a stitch in time really does save 9. You trying to fix things up once Humpty's fallen off the wall is so much harder. And I think you guys did a fantastic job in recognizing the importance of the stuff early on in the piece. Now, my sort of penultimate question to you, if I don't ask this one, I will be in a lot of trouble. So, is how did you find your experience working with EverEdge, and what value do you feel that we kind of brought to the table?
Yeah, I think as a general comment, we found it to be an excellent experience, and quite frankly, very good value. I think the depth of the work done was really a surprise to me personally. I hadn't realised that there was so much work required to analyse the intangibles landscape in the business. It was more complex than I had expected, and I think you really did a superb job of making us understand that we had to look at our intangibles in a different way. We had to understand them in a different way, and that required a lot of thought on our part. Many of us put a lot of time into the process, but the interaction with you guys was really, really good in that sense, really valuable. So that was excellent, and I think. But then more than that, the execution of, or understanding the strategy, and being able to formulate a strategy which was coherent and which all of us in the leadership team bought into, was sort of the first base camp, if you like. The next stage was then, with your support, developing a plan which was really practical and really executable, and because without that, obviously without having the ability to execute, having a strategy is really not a lot of use. So that was also key, and in the follow-up, as we've had several questions on specific points and so on, that's also been incredibly useful for us. So I think now 6 months ago or a year ago, quite honestly, it was a little bit awkward responding to some of the questions that some investors would pose to us. Now we are really quite bulletproof, quite frankly, and really able to articulate this actually very, very strong intangibles piece across the business.
That's fantastic. It's been a real fantastic pleasure working with you guys as well. It's fantastic to have a client that takes this stuff seriously, acts on it quickly, and also has been so successful on the way that you guys have, is raising capital, also have the capital deployed behind this advice and things. It's been fantastic. And final question, is really any final comment you'd like to make or advice you'd like to share with other companies that are looking to scale their business, raise capital, that kind of thing, because you guys have been so successful. Any kind of tips or tricks that you'd suggest?
I guess, in the context of intangibles, I think the key thing is for founders and boards at an early stage to really invest some time and money in looking at this and getting it right. And it's very, very easy to overlook when businesses are so busy and so stretched in terms of resources, but also to be prepared to do things differently, to not simply look at the competition and say, well, we've got to do it that way. We've got to have a dozen patents. We've got to have 15 registered design rights. That may well not be right for the business. So to think really deeply about what is actually right for the business, and again, in the sort of competitive environment that the business exists, and again, then simply to be very practical, really work out what are the brass tacks, how do we really make this real, and if necessary, stress test that, as we have done. We've taken some of the work product and run it by friends who are senior partners in law firms in London, for example, and said, how does this look to you if you were advising XYZ private equity firm? So using any of the resources that are available to you in that way, I think, to really kind of stress test the model and roll it out.
Fantastic. Well, Anil, thank you so much for your time. I know you guys are super busy, and congratulations on your success today. And we look forward to further congratulations going forward.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the opportunity to talk to you today. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks very much.